Уважаемые участники Moscow Urban Forum 2017, мы начинаем пленарную сессию FIFA 2018, спортивный мегапроект как драйвер модернизации городов. Модератор пленарного заседания, генеральный продюсер телеканала РБК Александр Богомолов.
Dear participants and guests of Urban Forum 2018, we are starting our plenary session devoted to FIFA 2018 sport mega projects as trigger for urban renewal. On Sunday, the first football tournament ended, the Confederations Cup, which is hosted on the eve of the World Cup, and a year from now Russia is going to host one of the most important global events, FIFA World Cup 2018, and preparation for this event was a powerful driver for large-scale modernization of Russian cities, not just the cities where games are going to be hosted, but also many other cities. We are going to discuss some of the results of this preparation, some of the results of how we are preparing for the Confederations Cup. And let me invite to the stage the participants in today's plenary session. Marat Husnulin, Deputy Mayor in the government of Moscow for Urban Development and Construction. Pyotr Birykov, Deputy Mayor of Moscow for Housing, Utilities and Amenities. Mars Kazazulin, General Director of ENG Nikolai Gulyaev, Head of the Department of Sport and Tourism of the City of Moscow. Vitaly Kushneryov, Head of Administration of Rostov-on-Don. Dalia Safiulina, partner of KB Strelka, and Andrei Peregudov, Senior Vice President of VTB Bank. My first question goes to Mr. Husnulin. Mr. Husnulin, the World Cup is a huge event, a huge driver for the infrastructural development of the city. What facilities were built in Moscow thanks to that event, and what the legacy of the World Cup is going to be? Thank you. I believe that the main result of the World Cup, at least for Moscow, will be the fact that as we were preparing for the World Cup, actually built many sports facilities and upgraded many sports facilities. But not only sports facilities, we beautified the territory around, something that my colleague is responsible for. We seriously improved the transport infrastructure. We came up with lots of incentives to develop hotel business, hotel rooms, and we have some reserve for the future by building not just some major sports facilities like the Luzhniki Stadium, CSKA, Spartak, Dynamo stadiums, but we also built 11 practicing fields and children's schools for over 10,000 kids. The World Cup will be over, but the entire infrastructure will stay with us. It will be working for the Moscow residents, for our guests, for major events, and eventually improving the health of the population. We believe that the effect from this World Cup preparation for Moscow is huge. Under the personal leadership of Mayor Sobyanin, we've been doing it for all these recent years. It's great that we were able to preserve the Luzhniki Arena. This was not an easy task to preserve an old stadium, and based on that old stadium to build a high-tech, cutting-edge stadium. We are not ashamed of that stadium. We finished it on time, within the budget, and we believe that's going to be one of the major achievements of Moscow. We believe that it's a huge advantage that investors took an active part in preparing for this World Cup. Let's say the Dynamo Stadium. It's not going to be used for the World Cup, but it's a huge city planning project, a huge cluster for the development of the city. Our colleagues from the VTB Bank will tell us more about this project, but there's a huge effect for the city, and Moscow is ready to receive these events at the highest level in terms of safety and security, in terms of the security system that we're using, video surveillance cameras, integrated devices. This is one of the best projects in the world. Thank you. Thank you, Marat. You mentioned, Mr. Husnulin, you mentioned the Luzhniki Stadium. And for sure, let me ask you this next question to Mars Gazizulin. A month ago, you finished this reconstruction of that legendary stadium, one of the icons of Moscow, and it started way back in 2014 as part of the preparation for the World Cup 2018. It is at Luzhniki where the main events of the tournament are going to be held. The opening ceremony is one of the semi-finals, and the final game, of course, it's going to be in Moscow. Mr. Gazizulin, tell us, how has the stadium changed? What was special about preparing sports facilities, not just for an international tournament? Well, Luzhniki has seen their share of events, but for mega events, as far as I know, the entire engineering infrastructure has been modernized. What has it given to the city? Microphone, please. Microphone, please. Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. Luzhniki is a legendary stadium with the maximum amount of seats in Russia. It hosted some historic, legendary events. That's why we're paying special attention to preserving the historic front of the stadium, its looks, and at the same time ensure that there is a modern infrastructure within the stadium of a cutting-edge stadium up to all FIFA requirements. As the stadium was rebuilt and reconstructed, all these tasks have been successfully solved, and as the result of this reconstruction, we increased our floor space by about 50,000 square meters. Now, currently, it's over 220,000 square meters. We added 3,000 more seats. We got the natural pitch, which is up to all FIFA requirements. Within this pitch, there are special synthetic threads to keep it stable under any load during the games. We introduced modern security systems. We installed comfortable seats of a new category, about 100 skyboxes, 300 seats for low mobility citizens, all conditions for the media and the reporters, and the way this spectators move around the stadium also changed. You could evacuate the entire stadium in 15 minutes. Now, for that, we increased the number of entrances. In the past, Luzhniki had 12 entrances. Now there are 16 of them, instead of 14 staircases, we have 44 cascade-type stairs that you can use to enter and exit the stadium. In addition to that, there are more exits to the stands, and that's why now we have additional amenities and comfort for the spectators. As the stadium was reconstructed, there was one important task. We had to preserve the looks of the stadium. That's why the outer wall, which was worn and torn by about 50%, we restored it on the outside, replacing about 40% of ceramic tiles. We selected technology where we made some new tiles, and they were added to the old historic front, which allowed us to preserve the historic looks of the facade. We also impregnated the wall with some solutions which improved its strength. We built some new cast-in-place framework to preserve the load-bearing capacity. We only kept one old span that used to hold this wall together. And then when we were building new spans, we actually strengthened the old parts of the wall, and then we built those cascade stairs. Visibility is much better, 81,000 seats, and from any part of the stadium, whether you are at the top or at the bottom, you can see very well what's going on the pitch. In addition to that, we got some additional features at the stadium. We got the largest panorama platform all around the oval. The length of the oval is 900 meters. You can walk around and enjoy the view of all the buildings around this arena. 39,000 square meters of the so-called media roof, which you can use to broadcast advertising and have replays of what happened at the stadium. In addition to that, we increased the space of the cover at the top to protect the seats from rain and other types of precipitation. And also we paid special attention to security systems. That was one of the major requirements of FIFA. Security has to be ensured at and around the stadium. For that, we developed and designed a variety of systems, over 1,000 cameras inside that record everything that's going on, over 1,500 cameras in the adjacent territory, 486 metal detectors, bag-and-bag systems, and it all allowed us to introduce cutting-edge fire suppression systems and evacuation systems. It took us 3 years and a few months, and now the stadium is ready for the games. And some of the first testing matches are planned for the autumn of this year. This is the diagram how much it cost for different countries to reconstruct their stadiums. Our costs, even though we had some currency fluctuations when we were about to end our operations, the cost of reconstruction was the lowest, actually, compared with similar facilities in the world or or any greenfield projects. If we talk about how it impacted the city when this stadium was finished, Luzhniki is a huge sports facility. It is still a construction site today, but there are many different facilities around. Also, we have the gymnastics center, which is going to be built by 2018, a swimming pool, a tennis center, an ice rink, and Luzhniki is turning into this center of sports. That's why residents of Moscow may come and go in for their favorite sports. We have excellent logistics. We have Moscow Central Circle line and a metro station nearby. That's quite comfortable and an excellent environment for both residents of Moscow and its guests. Thank you very much for your presentation. That was quite impressive. As we were preparing for the Confederations Cup and the World Cup next year in Moscow, and the residents of Moscow definitely can see that, there is a huge beautification project going on. Let me ask Mr. Birikov, what has already been implemented and what is still in the plans to finish during the year that we have left. Distinguished colleagues, the government of Moscow, headed by Mayor Sobyanin, back in 2010, decided that the city should be growing, that the city should be comfortable, livable, and for guests to stay in the cities and streets. And that's where the first interpretations were born for coming up with a good urban environment. Back then, we began to prepare for the World Cup. We set some specific goals, what we need to do. We started small with yards and 24,000 yards, territories between districts were modernized, children playgrounds were built, over 4,000 of them. And in the city today, we have 436 organized parks where people of all ages can find things to do. And 2010, we only had 130 of them. In the last 4 years in the city, we got about 250 parks near where people live. These were the first steps as we were preparing for the World Cup. But these steps also included some global decisions. One of such global decisions or solutions for the city was this My Street program. We started with My Yard, My Building Entrance, and then we moved on to My Street program. We were inspired by the opinion of Muscovites themselves. They voted through internet, an internet portal, what they wanted to see in a particular street or in a particular square. So our strategy is as follows. The city should be pedestrian-oriented, and we know, and also for all guests of the city, as we walk along the streets with broad paved walks, and you could get excellent lighting, and you could see the historic looks of the city. 220 kilometers of pedestrian streets have been beautified. By the end of the year, we'll add 60 kilometers of pedestrian spaces and 118 streets and squares. We work on them in such a way so that first we go from the city center then to secondary streets, those connecting streets between the main streets. We worked on the Garden and Boulevard rings, Kremlin ring. We are finishing work in central streets and squares. At the same time, it has to be noted that today, as you walk along the streets, we see around 2,000 facades in Moscow that have been upgraded. 700 historic sites have been improved.
It's our task to learn more about the history of our city, to love the city more, and of course it attracts tourists. 2 years ago, Moscow was on top of European cities attracting tourists, because one of the areas in the preparation for the World Cup was to find ways of improvement. Today we say that the city prepares not only sports facilities like stadiums, but we also commissioned 46 sites within the framework of the program that will be used during the World Cup. It means that both athletes, fans, tourists, inhabitants of the city will go not only to sports facilities, but they will also go for a walk in the city, enjoy the squares, and so on. First and foremost, our mission is to make the city accessible for pedestrians, to create maximum public spaces where the inhabitants of Moscow can spend their free time. Today we say that the number of tourists grows in the city. Today we say that there are 7 festivals held in the city. They are organized in different seasons and dedicated to different topics. We welcome all the participants. The number of visitors is millions of people. As far as parks are concerned, the number of park visitors grew from 10 to 46 million people, which means the growth was by almost 5 times. It means that there is an opportunity to spend free time, to relax there. Parks are free of charge. They became open for visitors. If we speak in detail about what was done to make the city comfortable, I would like to give you some examples about renewal of our sports facilities, including Luzhniki Stadium. At Luzhniki Stadium, we have 50 kilometers of streets that were renewed. We created new sources of energy with the best provision of energy possible. The same ideas were implemented at Spartak Stadium. Adjacent territories were also improved near the sports facilities. Recently we had a football game at Luzhniki, at Spartak, and now we see that the territory is truly beautiful there. It's not only our assessment, but also the assessment of FIFA representatives, athletes from Russia and abroad. All the utilities near the sports centers and at the sports centers were also improved, which means that we worked in all possible areas. Success of this work, as a success of work in any area of the city, depends on the level of cooperation between the departments of the government. About 500 different authorities, bodies, local bodies cooperate to prepare for the World Cup. We supervise this work on behalf of the government of the city, and we can say that all the tasks are being followed. An important question is safety issue. For the inhabitants of Moscow who spend time outside as long as we prepare for the World Cup and during the World Cup. Safety is ensured with the help of cooperation with different authorities, bodies, police. We introduce video surveillance cameras. We create territories that are insured with safety at an unprecedented level. The previous games at Spartak Stadium were more than satisfied with the safety question. We also focus on fire safety at the games and for the future. I would like to underline once again, at the plenary session of Moscow Urban Forum, we discussed the issue today. The management, the efficiency of management of the city has an impact on the efficiency of the city in general, on how safe and comfortable it is to spend time outside. Today, the inhabitants of Moscow go outside, spend time outside, go for a walk, enjoy time outside, knowing that they are safe. These are parts of our common success. If you raise a question if people love our city, I can give you an example. Before the match between Chile and Mexico for the third place, the representatives of Mexico team came to us and said, you know, yesterday we were at Bolshaya Dmitrovka Street. We really liked it there, and no matter how this game finishes, we will go for a walk from Mokhovaya to Dmitrovka Street to the restaurant, buy food, because it's so beautiful on the streets of your city. So beauty of the city depends on our cooperation. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Birykov, and I would like to ask the next question to the head of the Department of Sports and Tourism of the City of Moscow, Nikolai Gulayev. If you do not know it, Nikolai Gulayev is not simply an official, he's also an Olympic champion of 1988, a skiing champion. Clap your hands. So pleasant to see him on stage with us. Mr. Gulayev, what can you tell us about infrastructure of safety, touristic infrastructure, sports infrastructure? All those things are prerequisites of success during the World Cup. How can you assess if Moscow is ready for this mission? Hello, everyone, and thank you. Dear friends, Mr. Birykov and Mr. Husnulin have already spoken about the readiness of transport infrastructure, pedestrian infrastructure, street infrastructure for the World Cup. And if you allow me, I would like to come back to the event that happened just 3 weeks ago. I mean the Moscow part of Confederation Cup. If you do not know, 4 games happened in Moscow, including the game for the 3rd place. All of them were organized at Spartak Stadium. About 153,000 fans came there, and we had 13.5 thousand foreigners. As far as safety is concerned, then 16,000 people were responsible for the safety issue. So 4,000 people were responsible for safety at every single game. And this means that Moscow is truly ready for the main tournament of 4 years, a tournament that we can compare with the Olympics. It's not a secret that the World Football Cup is an important event in the world of sports and in the world in general. It's an event of truly high level. Russia hosts this wonderful feast of football for the first time. I can tell you, I'm convinced that the whole infrastructure, including tourist infrastructure, is ready for it. More than 1,800 hotels received certificates that they are ready for the World Cup. Till the end of the year, we'll construct 10 hotels more, brand hotels, members of this or that chain, and it will give more than 3,000 rooms for the city. the guests of the capital, football fans, inhabitants of the city will have good infrastructure and place to stay in Moscow during the World Cup. We offer hotels and rooms for people with different income. There is no doubt that Moscow is the main city of the championship. Why is it so? First of all, our games will take place at two stadiums, at renewed and legendary Stadium Luzhniki. The opening ceremony will take place, some games of the group stage, half finals, and the main game of the World Cup. Final game will also take place there, and also 5 games at Spartak Stadium. So there is no doubt that main attention will focus on Moscow. There will be a lot of foreign guests coming to our country. The majority of foreigners will go to Moscow and use the capacities of Moscow airports. Moscow will become some kind of the main transportation hub during the World Cup. Taking into account the experience of cultural and sports event organization, I can tell you we are ready for it, and I'm convinced to say that this feast of football will happen, and we will organize it at the highest level possible. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gulayev. It happens rarely that we have an opportunity at a job place to ask a question to Mr. Beregudev. I'm the fan of Spartak, and I want to ask a question about Veta Arena Park at Petrovsky Park. It's a project of comprehensive reconstruction of Dynamo Central Stadium, one of the legendary Moscow sites. All the adjacent territories, as we all know, unfortunately, according to the decision of FIFA, will not be used, and the stadium has the capacity of the stadium is not big enough. Nevertheless, I can tell you that the territory becomes better and better. The building becomes higher and higher. The facade is almost ready. The heart beats faster. We cannot wait. What can you tell us about the stage of the project? What functions will Veta Arena Park perform, and how will the image of this historical district of Moscow change with the establishment of the new territory? Thank you for your attention to our project. And I want to tell you that despite the fact that we are not the official stadium of the World Cup, we participated in a Russian application, and we are happy that our application won, and then the decision was taken by organizing committee FIFA and us that 3 groups will play in one city for the first time. Luzhniki is a huge stadium for opening and closing ceremonies. Spartak was constructed several years earlier, so that was why such decision was taken. But I believe that we will somehow participate in the World Cup. I don't want to say that someone will not manage to finish construction works and we will have to help them, but I'm absolutely sure that in the programs of the championship, in the concert programs, in the programs of football fans, we will somehow participate. I'd like to raise one question. The representatives of Rostov-on-Don spoke not only about Moscow, but also about macroeconomic picture of the construction of large stadiums and sports events. We call our presentation #not a white elephant, simply because we worry that all such facilities that are constructed in small towns without domestic teams for 45,000 spectators, as you know, in South Africa, or in Brazil. Well, let's leave Brazil because it's a football country, but people construct stadiums with capacity 75,000, 80,000 people in the cities where there's no domestic team. They remain empty. And if you want to speak freely and openly about this issue of concern, we have to raise a question: what happens with such facilities afterwards, as people say, before and after? We have to state that in the cities, there are some cities where World Cup will be the only large event, in Saransk, for example, and there we will have to think about exploitation means, maintenance funds to keep such facilities in the right state. That's why I would like to demonstrate this slide to you. If such a situation happens that we have to construct larger scale projects according to the requirements of FIFA, then they have to become a good part of city environment. And we should try to make it a trigger of city environment rehabilitation and city improvement. The pictures that I have shown to you are good examples. Here on your left, you can see an abandoned district of New York, Hudson Yards, where they constructed this district. Of course, it costs a lot. $32 billion were invested by private investors there, where on top of the former railway, they constructed a lot of commercial buildings. Also, on top of the slide, to your right, you can see an example from Los Angeles called Staples Center. And as you can see, it's not only Staples Center, but there's also a huge stadium for soccer team, which is now transformed into a Congress Center. Around it, there are several hotels, towers, and it's center of attraction of people, and they organize hundreds of different events per year. It's a wonderful non-sports example, but I like it. It's a Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. It took 15 years to construct it, because the administration of the museum wanted to locate it right in this city, and they had to fight for it. They constructed it in former industrial areas. They cleaned the river, constructed parks, laid out the gardens, constructed the building, and now it's the best point of attraction. Now Bilbao has become a center of attraction. And now you remember Margaret Thatcher, all that riots. And finally, they constructed such a building where docks were located. In the city, there is no domestic team, but still about 200 different events are organized at this facility. And all these examples lead me to the question of Dynamo. I agree with Peter that people should feel comfortable if they want to go for a walk. For us, it's really great because you don't need a car, you don't need subway. You can walk from city center to us. We tried to integrate us into the sports park that had been constructed before us. You remember, this tower was not destroyed by me, don't worry, it was destroyed in the 14th century. It's a new sports site, it's a new sports stadium. We had to find ways to use it in a more creative way, because it's located in the city center. It's a big stadium, and we organize only about 20 games per year. It's almost impossible to to find the way to use it. That's why for different purposes. So now you can see that it can be used as concert facility. I'm sure it will be the best, and we do everything possible from the point of view of acoustics and sound. By the way, the acoustics in this hall is just great. Near the ground, you can see a historical wall. We had to fight with historians, and we proved that we had to keep 30% of the outside wall. We restored it, reconstructed it according to the old drawings. So it's a passage. The pitch that you can see for football and hockey are elevated. They are 11 meters higher than the ground, and under the pitch there's parking. Thanks to all those things, we ensured that this facility can be self-sufficient. I guess we will organize about 170 events per year, including 20 football events. In addition to that, there will be a hotel. Perhaps you have seen it, and also apartment buildings that will be commissioned next year. I believe that, let me take just 2 minutes of your attention. How can we achieve success in this project? The most important thing is to bring back the atmosphere of Dynamo, so that everyone wants to go there, so that everyone feels nice and at home. Social environment that we create there, we collaborated with the inhabitants of district and asked them about their opinions about the names of the streets, for example, and you will hear about it. It will bring back the feeling of home at the stadium of sports, and finally we will be able to say we are fans of our team.
It's not only about national teams or clubs. It's also, perhaps, we will have 50,000 spectators for some quarterfinal game of university or high school game, when you understand that you can be a fan of your community and for your Dynamo team, for example. And thank you for your attention to our project. I hope that World Cup will also be somehow touched by the World Cup, and because it's the largest of the existing stadiums and the oldest of the existing stadiums in Russia. Let us hope that none of the Russian stadiums that are being built for the World Cup will turn into this white elephant. And now our next presenter is Dalia Safiulina, legacy of the World Cup. And for FIFA, legacy has always been important. It's not just the sports infrastructure or non-sport infrastructure, but some intangible legacy. You have this project of beautification of key public spaces in 40 cities in Russia. So as I said in the beginning, it's not only about the World Cup hosting cities. What are your successes? What are the events that are held in these cities? Thank you, Alexei. Let me tell you about what we're doing even now to preserve some legacy of the World Cup. As was mentioned today, there are two parallel scenarios of preparing for the World Cup. The World Cup could be the goal in itself when you build sports infrastructure, transport infrastructure, but you can also use the World Cup as the legacy project to drive the city development. And we offered to use the second scenario when we beautify the key public spaces in 40 cities of Russia, is coming up with new images of the city. You look at deprived territories with untapped potential, and you come up with material assets and also come up with some intangible things, which is the intangible legacy of the World Cup. A decision was made that in addition to 11 hosting cities, altogether 40 cities with 28 million people should be hosting the World Cup, in a sense. And to implement a project of that size, more than 3,500 people are working on it. The Ministry of Construction is involved, additional funds, and our Strelka company is the project office that interacts with all the stakeholders in the project. In addition to that, we have to say about people locally, administration representatives. Here we see some city representatives who city administration representatives who will have to be implementing these projects, and also in addition to that, regional expert communities, all these architects, landscape artists, culture specialists. They know their cities the best, and of course the residents of the cities themselves. We had a number of workshops organized with the residents of these cities, and you can see these photos from Ekaterinburg, where we had one of the projects last week. As part of our project, we have not only regional architects from these cities, but also we had an open contest, national contest, giving every architectural bureau an opportunity to participate, whether it's an experienced company or a young team of architects. Residents who voted anonymously for the winner intuitively chose those who were familiar with the local context. For example, this is a Vladikavkaz architect piece that was chosen as the winning project. This is a futuristic picture of how residents of cities look at the current public spaces. We analyzed thousands of photos in social media, and there are some gaps. In white, we show the beautification borders in a particular city. In this case, it's the town of Izhevsk. And there are some areas which are not perceived as something beautiful, but they have a significant development potential. So primarily, as we work on our project, our goal is to beautify these particular spaces with untapped potential. And what is done in these cities specifically? We beautify parks, embankments, streets, squares, and parks as the new locations for the urban culture, are the most popular public spaces among our residents. There are about 20 of them in those 40 cities, and there are different types of parks where we, together with local architects, are trying to provide opportunities for sports and maximum contact with nature. You see many streets in those towns that are going to be beautified. We use these public spaces daily, and in cities that are going to host the World Cup, these are going to be pathways of spectators and fans that they are going to notice in the first place. There are some other streets in the historical areas which we need for a historical context. Embankments are often a problem of the Russian cities, because often these territories are not accessible for residents due to industrial nature of sites or our history in the 1990s, early 2000s. So we try to pick up embankments to make sure there is access to water, and to make the embankment the main city promenade, as here in Vladivostok. And the squares that are already used in Russia for public mass events, but we are trying to make them comfortable for daily usage and for some events. For example, this is a festival and a particular location in the town of Lipetsk, where the city actually started. And together with local architects, we offered this idea of restoring the local culture to make it a celebration, a festival for the locals in the first place. The World Cup will be a great driver for the development of the cities and also entertainment program and events. If you want to see more projects, come up to our booth, to our stand, which is quite visible. 230 public spaces are going to be beautified, and the overall space there is comparable with the space of the garden ring. It's not easy to finish it in 1 year. Some regions are going to take some initial steps, but overall it's for the next 5 years, and the cities of Russia are going to change for the better. I hope that the local administrations will be actively supporting this project and implementing what local architects design. Thank you. Thank you, Dalia. My next question goes to Vitaly Kushnerev. Mr. Kushnerev, Rostov-on-Don will be one of the cities that will be hosting the World Cup games next year. And in addition to Rostov Arena, you also plan to build a number of other sports and infrastructural facilities. Tell us about them. What will be the impact for the city thanks to the World Cup, and how this new infrastructure will be developing after the World Cup is over? Thank you. The decision to add Rostov-on-Don into the list of host cities for the World Cup was the starting point for us to start implementing such major projects as building Rostov Arena, stadium and airport terminal, and a few other facilities. Altogether, we focus on transport, social area, hotels, healthcare, engineering infrastructure, and beautification. In terms of transport infrastructure, we are reconstructing the Voroshilov Bridge, the bridge which is a connection to the city center from the south, from Krasnodar. We have fully rebuilt it. We dismantled the old bridge, and we doubled its capacity. Then we built some main street in the southern part of the city and the stadium. We are building 2 pedestrian and transport pathways in the east of the Rostov Arena. We upgraded the Levoberezhny Street, which is well known not just in Rostov, where we have about 100 restaurants. We develop the pedestrian area in the alleys of the central part of the city. We are reconstructing some central streets, including Bolshaya Sadovaya Street and Stanislavskaya Street. And this year, as we implement the comprehensive program for the development of transport infrastructure, we are repairing street and road network at 80 streets of the city. In addition to that, for the last 3 years, considering this year, we repaired more than 280 streets, changing the surface, and it's about 20% of the entire length of our roads in the city. To upgrade the rolling stock of the passenger transport, we are going to purchase 200 new large capacity buses. Half of them are going to be using gas motor fuel, and That's environmental issue. In addition to that, we purchased 16 tram cars, and this year going to buy 14 additional cars, and electric buses are in our plans. We are not using them yet, but we are launching some routes on gas motor fuel and electrified transport to turn them into ecological routes. In addition to the Rostov Arena Stadium, next to it, we are modernizing a big sports facility using the existing rowing canal and the new waterway there that we built as we prepare for the World Cup. It's going to help us, of course, develop high-level sport and mass sport. We are reconstructing 4 practicing fields and training bases for teams, and it means that the youth of our region will get access to these facilities. We try to make our urban environment as comfortable as possible. Already been mentioned, our main goal is to beautify Rostov yards and public spaces. Here we interact with the Strelka Design Bureau. We have selected 6 main areas in the city, some of the central streets and parks that are going to be beautified in the next 5 years, and some of them before the actual World Cup games. We are building some hotels, 5 of them, and renovating yet another one, and over 750 rooms are going to be ready. Altogether, the number of rooms in the city will be 4,900 rooms, while the requirement for Rostov agglomeration is 2,500. The upcoming sports event is a huge incentive for our development. When we are done with the World Cup, we will continue developing, building new sports facilities. Then on the left bank of the Don River, we have allocated some land for the handball arena. On the left bank of the city, of the river, will become the center for recreation and sports. We are going to commission an ice rink, a horse riding school, and which is being built as part of a Gazprom program. This additional infrastructure will allow us to develop rowing, canoeing, triathlon, beach volleyball, equestrian sport, and many other sports. Our city is changing, and I'm sure it will become the center of attraction for not just tourists, but for our residents as well. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Vitaly. Distinguished participants of the forum, let's thank our speakers. Katya, you want to say something? Yes, I cannot but want to say something. There is a short letter, but actually it's very important. The idea is why does the city government doesn't do anything about the entrance to the city? It's not so. Within the framework of Moscow Improvement Program, the city of government made 6 entrances to the city this year. We'll do 3 more, including Leningradsky Avenue. All those things mentioned in the letter from Khimki district is a zone of responsibility of our colleagues. We can speak today about Moscow, Moscow region, Moscow agglomeration. Unfortunately, the budgets are different and everyone is responsible for its own budget. Once again, We can look into the face of the inhabitants of the city. The city of Moscow truly encourages the changes in the city. The whole country begins to beautify the city, to improve the city, including the authorities of Khimki district. Somehow now we are not responsible for the actions of that local government. And another question that they ask me often is, why don't you take the garbage from the landfills of Khimki? Every inhabitant of Moscow pays money for the garbage to be taken away from the city, and the operators pay money to the landfills that take the garbage. And right there, they have the money for the renovation, for the use of this or that landfills, including those 24 landfills that were closed by the government. 14 are still operating. So why should inhabitants of Moscow pay more? For us to pay 7 billion rubles, as you say, to recultivate landfills, it costs really a lot. So why should we ask the inhabitants of the city to pay more? We should act legally and talk to the owners of landfills. So the owners of landfills should invest money in recultivation of the landfills. Where should you bring the garbage to? Well, we'll take a common decision. Of course, we'll not leave it on the streets of the city. And I can tell you for sure, we will not let it like that. We will bring the garbage to officially operating landfills. We'll develop this area. We'll construct waste burning facilities, construct waste separation facilities, ask the inhabitants to separate the garbage, and so on and so forth. It's a whole program, and I will, of course, give your letter to my colleagues from Moscow region. Thank you, Mr. Birykov. Let's thank our speakers for informative discussion. We wish you fruitful work at Moscow Urban Forum, and we finish our session. Thank you.